Good afternoon and welcome, everyone. It's nice to see such a crowd out to listen to our budget presentation. The April 16th, 2024 regular council meeting is called to order at 4 o'clock. Council would like to acknowledge the Ucluelet on whose traditional territories the District of Ucluelet operates. Audience members and delegates are advised that this proceeding is being video recorded and broadcast on YouTube and Zoom, which may store data on foreign servers. There are two late items. The first one is correspondence related to Committee of the Whole, Item 7.1, Short-Term Rental Accommodations Act, loss of legal non-conforming status for existing B&Bs. And the second one, additional correspondence related to Committee of the Whole, Item 7.1, Short-Term Rental Accommodations Act, loss of legal non-conforming status for existing B&Bs. May I have a motion to add these late correspondence items to the agenda under Item 7.1?
So moved.
Councillor Kennington?
Second.
Councillor Mafty, all in favor? Motion carries. May I have a motion to adopt the agenda as amended?
So moved.
Councillor Anderson?
Second.
Councillor Kennington, all in favor? And that carries. Is there any unfinished business? Seeing none, we'll move on to 5.1. This agenda item is zoning amendment for a Forbes Road Food Bank. This report will be presented by the Director of Community Planning, Mr. Gregg.
Thank you. Through the Mayor, this council has seen before as essentially that the park. This is for the food bank at the Tugwell Field site. As the report just lays out, the alternative approval process is passed. The Parkland Disposal Bylaw, number 1334, has been adopted. So council really now can give third reading and then adopt the zoning amendment bylaw, the bylaw 1336. If there's any questions, I can answer them.
Any questions for Mr. Gregg? No, there is a staff recommendation. Would council like to make a motion?
I've got it. I will move that council give third reading to District of Ucluelet zoning amendment bylaw number 1336 2024. Separately, I assume, Mr. Rotenberg? Yeah.
Do I have a seconder?
Second.
Councillor Kennington, all in favor? None opposed, that carries.
I will move that council adopt District of Ucluelet zoning amendment bylaw number 1336 2024.
Do I have a seconder?
I'll second. Nope.
Oh, it's a tie. I'll give this one to Councillor Mafty. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed, that carries.
I move that council exempt the land parcel identified as Parcel A in District of Ucluelet zoning amendment bylaw number 1336 2024 from the servicing requirements of Village of Ucluelet subdivision control bylaw 1989 number 521 for the purpose of subdivision.
Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Councillor Anderson. Any further discussion? It's interesting that back in those days we were considered the Village of Ucluelet. All in favor? None opposed, and that carries. Okay, there are two report items. The first report item is 6.1256 Manderson Drive, exemption from Section 512 of the Local Government Act. This report will also be presented by the Director of Community Planning, Mr. Gregg.
Thank you, and through the Mayor. Another brief one. I know the audience is keen to get to the budget presentation. So this frontage exemption, it really duplicates the variance that was authorized by council in February for this proposed subdivision. It's gone through a zoning amendment. There's this other piece that, other than the zoning regulations and the frontage variance, there's also under the Local Government Act a minimum parcel frontage percentage, and so we need a motion of council to duplicate the variance to enable the subdivision to proceed. Are there any questions on this?
Any questions for Mr. Gregg? No, there is a staff recommendation if council would like to make a motion.
I will move that council exempt
westernmost 9.59 meters of 256 Madison Drive, Lot 10, Clayoquot Land District, Plan VIP 11923, PID 000510599, from the minimum 10% highway frontage required under Section 5121 of the Local Government Act.
Thank you, Councillor Kennington.
I'll second.
Councillor Anderson seconds. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? None opposed, and that carries.
Thank you.
Our second report item is what we've all been waiting for, 6.2, 2024 to 2028 Draft 5-Year Financial Plan. This will be a verbal report with an accompanying presentation. And please note the budget feedback presented in the agenda under this item. And this item will be presented by our new Director of Finance, Mr. Cadman.
Thank you, Mayor. All right. So we are at our final budget presentation for the 2024-28 financial plan. We've gone through the budget process and we've posted all the information throughout the period on our website. We've done numerous posts via social media and Ukimail. I just want to thank Sam and Nancy for taking charge of the communications. The budget has not seen any major changes over the period. One item to note is that the trailer that we're in the process of purchasing for Parks and Publics, it came in at $25K over the initial budgeted amount. This will be coming out of the COVID Restart Grant and will not affect property taxes. So in this slide, the change to note is the transfer from own reserves and buildings. That just shows the $25K increase coming out of our reserves from the COVID grant, and then the buildings has gone up by $25K. Also to note on the slide is the transfer to capital program. We've budgeted, as we'll see throughout the presentation, currently for 2024, the $1 million that was discussed for capital requisition, with $500K moving out through 2025 through 2028. So this slide has a summary of those two prior slides. It has the operations and capital into one total budget amount, which for 2024 is $17 million. So yeah, that's just a summary slide of the two prior. All right, so this is kind of leading into the capital side of the presentation. So one of the major talking points for the budget has been our water and sanitary and our capital upgrades that will be budgeted out over the next couple of years. So the state of our aging infrastructure has been a common talking point, with 40 to 60% of our in-ground infrastructure at its end of life. This means that there'll be large capital expenditures, with both repairs and maintenance becoming increasingly frequent and new infrastructure needing to be acquired. For perspective, the Hemlock Lift Station alone costs $1.7 million to replace, and we have 15 lift stations, all at various stages of aging. And we are currently putting around $100,000 aside for capital. So that's a pretty big difference between where we're at and where we need to get to. So on this slide, we have a list of the projects that we're planning to fund via debt. The increased capital requisitions will help alleviate some of the need for debt. These costs are also estimates, since the cost of projects are rapidly increasing due to inflation, and they also don't take into account the cost of borrowing. Currently, with interest rates around 5%, the cost of borrowing is quite significant. So in this slide, that further builds on the cost of borrowing. So with the 30-year mortgage, with the current interest rates, for every $1 million that we currently borrow over the 30-year term, we're going to end up repaying $1.9 million. So you're essentially doubling the cost of a purchase by borrowing over the 30-year term. And because of the scope and the size of these mortgages, the 30-year period is what we'd be looking for our mortgage repayments. Borrowing will always be an important part of fiscal policy, but at today's rates, it's prudent to try and lower our dependency on it. All right, so this is where we start getting into the property tax rate and what these requisitions mean. So this slide shows two schedules. So Schedule A shows the $1 million requisition and our proposed tax rate increase for 2024. So if you can see, 2024 shows a 14.98% increase for residential and 11.22% for business. With the $1 million increase, if we move back down to 500 grand in 2025, you see that rate increase drop drastically down to 6.13% and 3.73% respectively. This is just because from 100 grand to $1 million is quite a jump. So the rate increase shows that proportion. Once we build up our overall budget, then those rate increases substantially come down quite quickly. Schedule B shows if we do $1 million in 2024 and then $1 million thereafter. If we do $1 million in 2024, that drastically changes our ability to adjust to changing economic situations. Just how fast inflation things are changing. The quicker that we get capital into our budget, the easier that we are able to adapt to those different changes. In Schedule A, as you can see there, by 2028, we will be putting $3 million annually into our capital budget. If we do Schedule B, that gets us to $5 million annually. But with the power of compounding and increasing each year, with Schedule A, we'll have actually put in $15 million by 2028. $10 million, sorry, by 2028. And with Schedule B, we'll have put in $15 million. So this graph kind of shows the difference versus putting in, we have three different lines on our graph. The top two are putting in $1 million to start, and then the top graph is $1 million annually. The second graph is $1 million and then $500,000 annually. And then the third graph is just putting in $500,000 annually. So you can see with compounding, the more we put in and the earlier we put in, the faster it grows. And that's on a cutoff time period. As you put that time period further out, it continues to grow. It's when we were going through the slide, we were talking, it's just like when you talk to your kids, you say you have to invest early. The municipality is the same way. With compounding, the sooner you invest, the more effective and the better place that we'll be in over a longer term period. The difference between requisitioning $500,000 and $1 million in 2024 alone, if you put that over a time period between 24 and 2028, will be $2.5 million. So even just doing that 500 grand for this year over that 5-year period will be $2.5 million. So each year that we do this, it's as substantial as you play it over the 5-year period. All right, so these are the proposed tax rates. We have two options. We have with the $1 million requisition on the schedule on the right and the $750,000 requisition on the left. And those are the differences that we'd be looking at. So the main ones that see it different are residential and business. So at $1 million requisition, we're looking at 14.98% increase and business 11.22%. At 750 grand requisition, you're looking at 12.78 for residential and 9.99 for business. So it makes around a 2%, just under around 2% increase for that 250 grand difference in residential. They're in requisition. All right, so this slide breaks out where the different properties fit basically with the rate increases. So the top right there with the $1 million, there's a few items that are highlighted. So 70% of homes fall in the area where they went from 7% to negative 13% decrease. So with our proposed $1 million requisition, they would see a $344 to a $473 a year increase. So that's between, if you look at it monthly, that's between $28 and $55 per month, depending on where they come on that scale. I looked at Moneris, and for 2022, the average cost of a single restaurant meal is $42. So the $1 million requisition is essentially going out for dinner once a month. Then if you look at the next 26%, they fall between $55 and $88 a month. And between those two, that's 96% of all our single family homes that fall in that range. So it's a pretty reasonable increase. All right. This next slide shows the business impacts. It's the same. It's a pretty similar distribution of percentages that change. Most of the businesses are on the lower end of the scale as well. So this slide shows our budget feedback that we received throughout the process. We received two via written correspondence, which covered these 4 items here. Facility upgrades, including skate park funding, tennis pickleball courts, increased spending on maintenance and repair of parks and recreation infrastructure, increased spending on our aging infrastructure, including roads, sidewalks, and crosswalks, and then focusing on community water supply and storage. And then as a final note there, I summarized kind of the conversations that staff had at our budget open house. One of the major theme that we found was, nobody wants to see their taxes go up, but at the same time, people understand that this is where we need to go, and we wish we had started sooner. And with that, these are the proposed motions.
Thank you, Mr. Cadman. Any questions from council? So you're asking us to make a decision as to whether we want the $1 million annually?
So the first proposed motion is to authorize staff to execute the 2024 budget, including the $1 million capital. The budget has basically been accepted except for that $1 million capital requisition. So we can update that $1 million to whatever amount that you see fit. And then the second one will be updated that $1 million requisition for 2024 or whatever number you so choose. And then the 500 grand, it's basically a plan, but we can update that in future years, but what direction we would like to go.
So in the second motion, the $1 million in 2024, could that 500,000 be changed to $1 million annually?
Yep.
For the
Yep.
future years?
Exactly. And then the third item is just to prepare the tax rates bylaw, and then we can update that $1 million based on whatever we choose for 2024.
Okay, so discussion for council. Are we leaning toward the $1 million for this year and 500,000 annually afterwards, or $1 million each year?
I'd lean towards the latter. I think the way it's been presented, the feedback that we've heard, the information in front of us suggests that the more we can put in now, the better off we're going to be for a number of different reasons.
And the cost of borrowing is so horrific that we'd actually have more money to spend on infrastructure if we didn't borrow, right? Any other thoughts? Councillor Hoare?
I concur with Councillor Mafty, but the graph of compounding, for those who don't know the compounding, if you didn't start saving when you were 20, you're not retiring at 50 these days. So that's kind of where we are. We're 30 and we didn't start saving at 20, so.
Yeah, the graph showing the 3 scenarios is quite telling, actually. Councillor Anderson?
Yeah, I mean, we discussed this somewhat before, and I think that we all agreed when we saw the graph that if we bite the bullet somewhat now, it makes it a lot easier later, and we've got a lot of infrastructure to replace. So
Yes, our infrastructure is sadly lacking in maintenance.
It's not 30 either.
It's not 30 either, no. Councillor Kennington?
I agree with the group. I think we
Okay, then we have 3 motions that that could be moved. If someone wants to start out.
I'll jump in on that.
Okay, Councillor Anderson.
I would move that council authorize staff to execute the 2024 budget expenditures as presented at the April 16th, 2024 council meeting, including $1 million capital requisition.
I'll second that.
Councillor Hoare seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed? That carries.
I would further move that council direct staff to prepare the 2024-2028 five-year financial plan bylaw, including a $1 million requisition in 2024 and a $1 million annually for years 2025 through 2028, dedicated for the district's capital program.
I'll second.
Councillor Mafty seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed? That carries.
I would further move that council direct staff to prepare the 2024 tax rates bylaw based on the budget outline at the April 16th, 2024 council meeting, including a $1 million requisition dedicated for the district's capital program.
I'll second that.
Councillor Hoare seconds. Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed, and that carries. Thank you for that presentation, Mr. Cadman. That was really clear and easy to follow.
Thank you.
Okay, you can all leave now, now that the budget's been presented. The next item is a committee of the whole item. I therefore move that council move into committee of the whole. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second.
Councillor Hoare, all in favor? That carries. The only item for the Committee of the Whole to consider is 7.1 Short-Term Rental Accommodations Act, loss of legal non-conforming status for existing B&Bs. Please note that the late items include several pieces of correspondence related to this item. And Mr. Gregg will present this report.
It's great to have a full council chamber, particularly with so many kids. We got the smiliest kids in Ucluelet. I'm not going to go through all the details of the report. I think that I do have a couple of comments to sort of get the discussion with the committee of the whole going. And then really this is housing. We're back at housing. It seems like every other day the topic is housing. It's no secret that we have a province-wide and really a Canada-wide housing crisis. And what this report is about is that the province of BC part of their response has been some pretty big changes to provincial laws that affect local governments. And the adoption of the Short-Term Rental Accommodations Act, which happened in December, has some implications. And one of those pieces within a larger piece of legislation affects many of the bed and breakfast license holders in Ucluelet. And this issue, being it's pretty concentrated, is also though connected to a larger context of housing growth and the proportion of tourist accommodation to housing, which leads into a discussion of how the community sees itself and really what kind of future we want in Ucluelet, to sort of look at it at the highest level. But there's some specific personal impacts to this change in legislation and how it then affects how the zoning affects people's properties. And I was talking about the report with a very wise member of our community earlier today who put it really well, so I'm stealing his words, to say we need to balance fairness to the individual with addressing the housing needs of the community, and sort of the broader picture of the whole community, which is not an easy task for the unenviable task for elected council for the community. So we've provided this report really to spark discussion among council or the committee of the whole members, and hopefully tease out a sense of where you think the community is at and where we need to go, because there will be some other sort of longer term changes in the regulations, I think, around housing for this and a number of reasons. Really, again, as part of what's needed in the community, but also there's some legislated changes that BC's brought about, which means we need to tackle some of these things, and there's a timeline for it over the next really year and a half. So if there are any questions about sort of the content of the report, I can try to provide answers or expand on those areas, and really want to make sure that it's clear the background of how we got there, if there's questions about that, the options to improve the situation, and steps to get there going forward. But obviously, as I said, there's a larger community interest here, but also some very real, specific individual situations. And I think you have a lot of correspondence that we've read that has come in on these. And at the end of the report, we're recommending that that we renew a bunch of B&B business licenses for 2024, despite their nonconformity with the bylaw, with the zoning bylaw, and allow those license holders and community members to take a bit of a deep breath while we kind of tackle some of the bigger pieces, which are going to take more time, because that legislation, it kicks in, as I think everyone's aware, on May 1st, which is coming very, very rapidly. So maybe that immediate piece of the puzzle is a place sort of to start the community discussion, and then turn to sort of some of the bigger picture and longer term questions and options. I'm going to leave it there and see if there are sort of questions about pieces of the report that the committee or council has.
Any questions from the committee for Mr. Gregg? I think we're all probably really well versed in this by now. The province has thrown us a bit of a curveball on this one that we are forced to deal with. There's no questions. Okay. Did you want to carry on, or did you want...
No, really, I have some slides. I'm not sure if I'm going to need them. I'm going to see where the discussion goes. If there are questions, we can kind of get into those. As I said, there's a specific piece to this which affects those property owners and B&B license holders. But then, as I said, it touches on housing, growth, tourist accommodation. We can sort of answer those questions. But I think really there's some options that are laid out for the committee to consider, and we're really looking for a discussion and some insight on which ones seem to fit, or where we want to go. This isn't the time to today is not going to be making a decision on bylaws, which we haven't drafted yet, but getting some sense of where council is at and a reflection by where the community is at would be really helpful.
Well, I think based on the correspondence, we know where the community is at. Okay, well, I'll start us off. The zoning amendment bylaw number 1310, 2022, that went through in September, I believe, of 2022. I actually voted against that, as most people know. And I didn't like it then, and I don't like it now. And I would suggest that we repeal that bylaw. And that would put the language back to the way it was prior to September of 2022. So everyone who's legally non-conforming right now would be conforming. So I'll throw that open for discussion.
I guess I'll start.
Go ahead.
That's why I ran for council. I didn't like it either. Some of the problems that, or I think the unintended consequences for this are great. The benefits have shown to be very small. If I recall, it was 2 units were returned to the long-term rental market, and in that time, I haven't seen any new developments in Ucluelet. So I would prefer to see staff time go towards getting projects built that house people, as opposed to going after people's basements. So I would back you on that.
Take care. I'll keep going. Councillor Mafty.
I'll listen for now.
Okay. Councillor Anderson.
All right. Yeah, I think when the STR rules came out, I think staff's heart is in the right place when trying to fix affordable housing or making housing affordable, and was worried that we would be inundated with people buying up properties here to make mini hotels, and that was sort of the stress and the worry. And we've seen other townships, I'm not going to mention which one, but sometimes that happens in small places and it gets overrun by investors and things like that. So there was a correspondence that said, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. I have a baby, so I know how this goes. And I think in this case, protecting ourselves and having that legislation from the boogeyman, we inadvertently set up rules that would really hurt people that were playing by the rules. And that was just something that we didn't want to have. It was detrimental. And then when you kind of dig into it, it looked like there were situations where if there were two exact properties side by side, and this is the way I see it, if there were two properties side by side, and one of them was, one of the recommendations here was for spot zoning, I find that somewhat problematic in the sense that if one was zoned for B&B, the exact same house and the exact same lot next to it wasn't, there's a value difference there, and that becomes a bit of a problem. So if the person that had the zoning sells that, he can sell it potentially for more because it does have more value, because it's an income generator. Then that kind of has other downstream problems, because now the assessment for that, not just market value, but the assessed value is different. So the person that never had the spot zoning will likely be assessed at that tax rate as the person next to them, despite the fact that they never had that income generator. So, and I know that's we never know 100% if that's the way it goes with BC assessment, but I ran that by them a couple of times and tried to get an answer out of them, and it seemed like that was potentially the idea. So that was a bit of a risk as well. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you, Councillor Anderson. And I would like to add that part of what I would like to see is a new R1 zoning definition, call it R1 2.0, that restricts nightly rentals, short-term rentals. And we could apply that new zoning to any new development that was coming on board, like Monado Bay or Weyerhaeuser or High Focus. We could apply that zoning so that there would be no nightly rentals, and that would be a way of stopping that rise.
If I could just add to that, a part of that establishing a second zoning, it gives us a tool to, as we grow as a community, to adjust the unit count of nightly rentals and long-term accommodation, so that we retain our resort funding. So if we get too heavy on the long term, hopefully, then we have a zoning tool, the original R1, that we can apply in small doses to maintain that balance, maintain our funding, and maintain housing for everybody.
That's right. What Councillor Kennington is referring to is our resort municipality status. There are 14 resort municipalities in the province, and one of the criteria to become a resort municipality was that you had to have more beds for tourists than you had beds for citizens. And that's why we qualify, and Tofino qualifies, and most of the resort municipalities are small towns for that reason, which is why, like Parksville and Qualicum would love to have been a resort municipality, but that ratio just isn't there for them. So that's what Councillor Kennington is referring to. Councillor Hoare.
Well, I will comment on a couple of things that have been said. One, on the assessment question that you have asked the assessment people, I will tell you that my little townhouse up next to the co-op is always assessed in comparison to anything at the Ridge or Primera that sells. And I guarantee I can't have rentals. I am significantly smaller without a waterfront view. You know, I look at my neighbor's deck. And I have argued with assessment time and time again, and they continue to compare me to those properties. So my answer to you would be yes, based on my experience from assessment. So yes, I totally see that. And I think of my partner who has a house very similar to all the other Life Coast Guard houses on the street. And there are some that have B&Bs and there are some that do not, and he doesn't. So his place would be one of those ones that did not have the potentially higher resale value if he, if we created this spot zoning. One of the things when we were originally looking at all of this and we were looking at the lowish growth scenario, we were talking about like the potential to cap the number of B&Bs, but we never actually got back to that. Trying to come up with, how many do we think is viable? How many do we, kind of have to be aware of to continue to be a resort municipality, bearing in mind that the RMI funds a lot of things in our town that we would not be able to afford at all without it. So we actually threw some numbers around, did we not, Mr. Gregg?
Through the mayor, couple of things that I'm going to put out. So the growth analysis, and if I maybe will ask to be able to share my screen to illustrate a couple of things here. It was looking at that balance of housing and tourist accommodation, and we also looked into the RMI status. It does not hinge on a number necessarily. It really was a decision of the provincial cabinet of who got in there. I think it absolutely was a question, but as far as we can see, as far as we can tell, there's no trigger where we would lose our RMI status if the balance came in at a certain number of units or that sort of thing. And certainly what we'd shown through the, I'm now being asked to join as a panelist, so I can share. 1 second. Joey, I think it went away here. Bear with me. I'm getting the spinning wheel. There we go. Oh, it says it's disabled the screen sharing.
I love technology.
Well, yeah, here we go. Okay, and I think we want that window. All right, so just backing up a little bit, and council, you may recall some of these slides were from in late 2021. We did a discussion around growth, and it was about, and this is a bit of the background of where did that bylaw 1310 and the changes in the zoning, where did it come from? And so there's been this pattern of this kind of rapid growth in B&Bs, and that was also their rapid increase in housing prices in Ucluelet. And so the analysis, and it was sort of lengthy, was looking at, you have in that sort of time period over the last 10 years, there's this increase in the cost of housing, but wages haven't really kept up. And that then is also borne out with the housing needs assessment that was done in some depth for Ucluelet. The changes, here we go. So at the time we looked at, so the growth analysis, I'm going to skip ahead a couple slides here. We looked at what's the balance of accommodation versus tourist accommodation, tourist accommodation versus housing in the community, which is about 50-50, so balance sort of equal amounts of tourist accommodation, whereas in the past it had been about a 60-40. There was more housing than tourist accommodation. And there was a number of scenarios that were explored around growth. And so this was what was being discussed, and that then informed the official community plan and what sort of the land use of policies going forward that settled on that lowish growth scenario. All of those were based on the discussion was assuming that you did have a cap or a limit on the number of B&Bs. And then the discussion, so out of that came that bylaw 1310, which started out in a very different form. Because it really did look at doing, if you're going to limit the number of B&Bs, which currently there's a massive amount of latent capacity under the zoning in our residential zones where every single property could have 3 B&B units. And so then there's nothing restricting the numbers of them or controlling the numbers. It's not a decision of council on how many. It really is open-ended pretty much. And so there was a discussion, and initially we brought forward a bylaw amendment which looked at establishing or defining a B&B or bed and breakfast zone where it was this overlay, and so those existing ones would be recognized. So it's not, pushing them out of existence or changing their zoning designation, but really removing that accessory use from the single-family residential properties, so that if someone wanted to get into the business, it wasn't just an outright thing. It was basically you'd be asking for a permit or an approval from council, and that way there would be community control over the numbers, essentially. And that discussion at the council at the time was not in favor of taking that approach. And so there hasn't been a change in the number of properties that are permitted to have the bed and breakfast. Instead, there was some discussion around trying to transition the B&B to sort of slow it down to be more the traditional B&B. And so these amendments were really around, and that was sort of the direction of council at the time. How can we sort of make it back at least to be that mortgage helper, traditional B&B? And so these amendments around having, and there was talked about the muffin policy of, you know, that there being, as, and that's not one that, you know, we're out there checking to see what's in the basket in the morning. But that's in there. And so the entrance through the main door to be sort of that traditional, you're in the host's house where they welcome you into their home and there's a room down the hall and that's the bed for the night. That was the original kind of B&B concept, which predates Airbnb and online bookings by some decades. And that's how long it's been in the zoning, and that never really changed. So this was trying to get back to that because that was the direction of council at the time. Now that's the piece, that entrance through the main door, where most of the B&Bs in town are non-conforming, where certainly about half of them clearly are non-conforming in that non-conforming status. No one saw that the province was going to change the rules or the law in BC and remove that for short-term accommodation. And many of the other ones, there's the one graph in your report that talks about it being sort of nominally conforming, where they can enter through the front door, but they also have an exterior door, which is probably, we suspect, where most of the time the guests will come and go because it's more convenient and private. So that's just a bit of the background of sort of how it got there. So no, there currently isn't that. We don't have a tool for limiting the number of B&B licenses. And so that's something, though, that is going to be back on council's desk in a community discussion. I think because it really does, because of the housing impacts of how property values, the amount of rental housing that's available, and the balance of that tourist accommodation and housing is something that hasn't gone away. It's as acute now as any time. And the province is really now has a timeline where the community needs to have that discussion again, where we are going to need to do an analysis of what is 20 years of housing need in the community, change the OCP to include those lands, and then also change the zoning to make sure that that's in place. And so that we're waiting for the province to issue the rule book, which was supposed to come in January and hasn't come out yet. But we expect before the summer it should be in our hands, and that will allow us to start doing the analysis, which will lead to kind of that revisiting that growth, and then how, discussion, where does the community want to go with it, and then how does that inform the zoning regulations which actually put it in place.
So potentially the province's rules could cause even more changes that we don't know of yet beyond even this May 1st non-conforming, because we're going to have to rezone the OCP to deal with this 20 years ahead thing?
The part that the province essentially, so we did a housing needs assessment. It was in early 2022 that was received and adopted by council. And basically every community in the province has to now update that, and the clock is ticking on us. And they gave us a deadline to do that, and they said that they will say, here's the criteria and here's how you need to do those updates, and that was supposed to be given to us in January, and we're still waiting for the details. But that is really about projecting the number of housing units the community is going to need, projecting the growth over a 20-year span. And then it really doesn't say what form that housing has to be in. You could all be rental. It could all, could be various forms. So within Euclid, there's going to be a community discussion and ability to choose the locations, where's the water and sewer services. That whole discussion of what changes, if any, need to be made to our official community plan and zoning bylaws are really going to be local decisions. But we need to show that we are meeting that 20-year projection, and whether that's really similar or vastly different than what we have today, we really don't know until we see those pieces. But so there are some pieces outside of that little piece of legislation. There's other legislation they've adopted, and many people will have heard about. Certainly it affects the cities more than small communities because there's some population cutoffs. Or the one thing that really affects Euclid around the small scale multi-unit housing requirements, which is every community in the province needs to meet some minimums on what your zoning contains in terms of allowing for housing. And really all of our residential zones, our single family residential zones, have to allow for a secondary suite or an accessory dwelling unit. Most of them already do. There's a couple there's like, okay, we need to go look at that before June 30th, and you'll be seeing some bylaw amendments that are kind of non-optional to be in compliance with the provincial legislation. In other communities, they have to go to 6 plexes and 8 units on a single family lot and things like that. But those are more in the city where there's transit. In Euclid, it's going to be some of those accessory uses. But sorry, I'm going to ask for a longer neck on this thing one of these days.
Bend your knees.
It's terrible posture up here.
Yeah, right? I'm asking the questions because I'm like, if we do something, and don't get me wrong, May 1st is 2 weeks away. I'm not unaware of the urgency of this issue around non-conforming, but I don't want us to have something get thrown at us even later that causes even more problems, because the province has just been dropping these little drips of legislation instead of giving us all the rules at the time, giving us all the information. And so I that's just my, like, I would hate to make a big long-term decision and then discover that we now have to scramble again and fix it. So that's the reason why I'm asking these questions.
And through the merit, they have made some huge changes. I mean, this kind of province-wide changing the whole landscape of how communities make local planning decisions around land use. These are some of the biggest changes the province has made since they adopted the agricultural land reserve in the early 70s. So this is not a everyday thing when the province says, okay, here's the new game book. So I think we've seen it, but who knows? No one saw all of these pieces coming. We knew they were planning to make some major changes, and I think responding to, is anyone who's opened a website around news or in the province in the country lately will know that it's constantly discussion around housing and sort of the call to do something about it. Certainly they're trying, and not surprisingly there's some unintended consequences, and we're going to have to iron out those wrinkles. So the immediate one here is like, okay, we have some current people who have business licenses to operate an accessory business in their home. They followed all the rules, and as of May 1st, we have a problem. So, to initially, that is one piece of it. But I think that bigger community discussion around how much tourist accommodation is too much, how do we house our community? The housing assessment had made some very clear recommendations, and it was done for the whole West Coast, looking at all of the housing across the West Coast. And one of the things was, you need to regulate the number of bed and breakfasts, and you need to pivot to residential areas delivering housing in various forms. Now, there's a whole bunch of ways that could be done, and how does it affect existing properties or existing businesses versus future ones? That's all options that'll be in front of council. We're looking for some idea of sort of where this wants to go.
Okay, but for now, I think we need to help these 49 families that are at risk of losing their business license May 1st.
And through the mayor, that's our recommendation. And then the discussion, I'd like some further information on where council's at with the idea of like repealing bylaw 1310 amended the zoning bylaw. So that's why I brought up this slide on the screen. Those are some of the changes that were brought in with that bylaw. So if that is the desire of council, that is great feedback for us to hear from the committee discussion, because it would mean drafting another zoning amendment to either strike those pieces or make other changes. So what the sort of goal of that is would be helpful, and then we can work on that.
Yes, the goal would be to put the language back to the way it was before September of 2022.
That being said, as long as the principal residency requirement is...
It is in there.
Yeah.
It's in there. The in your report, it shows what has changed with as of September. It's all the stuff that's in yellow there on page 20, and the principal residence is not in yellow, so it would stay in there. I think I can speak for all of us that we want that condition for nightly rentals, that it be in the principal residence.
I think it's important to note that the legislation that we keep talking about is actually less restrictive than legislation that we have here. The legislation allows B&Bs in every home as long as it's your principal residence. So what we're talking about doing in a tourist town is being more restrictive on nightly rentals than the province is even asking people who are not in tourist towns to do. So it seems a little strange to me. It's like saying no more cutting down trees in a logging town or stop fishing in a fishing village. This is, unfortunately for some, this is who we are and what we are now, and until we expand our economy to have different ways for people to earn a living, this is it. So it doesn't make any sense to me to be more restrictive than the province. If we were just to adopt the legislation as is, you could nightly rental a secondary suite, an ADU, you could live in an apartment on site and rent your whole house. So I think we're doing pretty well as is, and even with our previous zoning would be just fine and would satisfy all the requirements of the new legislation.
I agree, yes. There is some provision in our zoning that says the owner can't live in a broom closet and rent out the whole house. So
The legislation allows that.
that's right. Yeah. So we're doing better than the provincial legislation. Councillor Mafty?
I actually took what I think for me is the unprecedented step of actually writing out some notes, because I've been consumed by this. I've talked to a lot of people. I've read all of the correspondence, the people that reached out to me directly. I communicated with them to get more context. And so if you'll bear with me, I'll read from notes that I prepared. All right, I'll go with that, because I think the first thing that's really important to remember here is that ultimately we're talking about provincial guidelines that are coming down. They're not municipal guidelines. We're in a position where we have the option of adopting them, but the rationale behind the guidelines is to address what most people would agree is a housing crisis. And this isn't a crisis in Ucluelet. We're not unique here. It's a challenge that's being felt across the province and across the country. And the purpose of the guidelines is specifically to limit the allocation of dwelling space to short-term rentals. It's not about punishing people. It's not about threatening them. It's not about cajoling them into providing long-term rentals, but it's about reducing the number of STRs, because there's a pattern that we see everywhere where STRs have proliferated, and they have mostly negative effects in those communities. There are countless examples around Canada, around the world, and there's a growing body of evidence that just conclusively shows that too many STRs are driving property values up, they're driving rent up, and they create a socioeconomic imbalance. There's also strong evidence that reducing the number of STRs actually reverses those trends, which is why these guidelines were drafted to begin with. That's why the province has come up with these. So I know we're not here to debate economic policies. We're here to talk about the 49 legal non-conforming STRs in Ucluelet. Now, I have a great deal of sympathy for everyone who is in here. I know lots of the people who wrote in. I'm under no illusions that for probably all of you, this is a really big deal. Like, I get that. I really do. The last thing that I think we should be doing as a council here is doing anything that can hurt people in our community. We're here to help, and we're here to help the community. So even if we end up making a decision that doesn't support the wishes of the community, I think the onus is on us to do everything we can to make that decision in such a way that it minimizes any undue financial hardship. Having said that, under the with the information that we've been given, I think the best we can do is soften the blow, give people time to adjust. I know May 1st is coming up. I think it's my hope that everyone can leave here resting sure and confident that the summer for them, the fall for them, isn't going to be affected. But eventually things are going to have to change, and I think that as far as these properties go, folks are going to have to either bring them into compliance or figure out how to transition away from relying on a non-compliant business to make ends meet. I've approached Mr. Lawrence, our CAO, to see if there's anything we can do to encourage or incentivize people who might be willing or able to turn short-term rentals into long-term rentals. I realize that's something that not everyone's going to even be able to consider, but to whatever extent we can support people who might want to do that, I think we should. at the end of the day, I think times are changing. You know, there was a time in Ucluelet when houses would have just piped their sewage into the inlet, right? And the town grew. People decided they weren't okay with that. They established bylaws to prevent that, even to the dissatisfaction and displeasure of people who now had to go to the expense of putting in plumbing. And, you know, we didn't say, oh, well, we're just going to grandfather all of those houses in because that's the way it's been. Times change, communities change. I think our role as council is to listen to what people are saying and to use that information to make decisions that benefit the town. We go to conferences, we go to conventions, we talk to ministers and policymakers, we talk to people in other communities, and we bring all that information back home to try to apply it to make decisions in the best interests of the community, and not just for people today, but for the future. One of the things that struck me reading a lot of the correspondence, especially from people that I knew, is that it's families, it's people who've got kids. And those concerns I feel them too. I've got kids here too. And there's a part of me that can't help but wonder how the impact of the decisions that we make today are going to affect our kids. Like, before I moved here, I thought, you know, whenever I do have kids, I'm going to be so happy to have them grow up in Ucluelet. And I'm at a point where I think that we need to make the same decision-making process that we do with our budget looking 5 years ahead, or that the province does looking 10 years ahead. Like, what's a quick win now if in 10, 15 years, all of our kids, all of your kids, they have zero prospect to live here and they have to move away? Like, what's that community going to look like, Ucluelet 2040? I don't want to look into like a doom crystal ball here, because that's not what we're here for. We're here to talk about these non-conforming properties. I think at this point, I certainly wouldn't support repealing the bylaw. I think that would be taking 2 steps back after taking 1 step forward. I would definitely support moving forward in such a way to give everyone who's affected the opportunity to either become compliant or figure something else out. But at the end of the day, I just don't think that we'd be doing our community a service by trying to, you know, push more STRs in here. And then I just want to conclude, I think it's important that people are aware, and, you know, this was already alluded to, that there are potentially even more controversial decisions that are looming on the horizon. Just, you know, between our council and Tofino and other places throughout the province, people are discussing empty home taxes. Soon we're going to be looking at zoning to support an OCP and trying to figure out what we want our community to look like in terms of what types of housing and where it is allocated. And there's still a lot of question marks that are, you know, surrounding decisions that might come down from the province in another month or in another couple months. You know, I think everyone would agree that it's gotten harder in Ucluelet. That's certainly something that came through in every single one of the letters that we got. And I think we have to be realistic the same way we were about the budget. We're going to have to make some changes, and we're going to have to make some decisions, and they're not all going to be popular. They're not all going to be easy, but it behooves us to do the responsible thing. So in a nutshell, I definitely don't want, you know, to shut anyone down here, but I don't think that coming up with ways to plug STRs back into the system is the solution.
One of the problems with B&Bs is they're not allowed kitchens. So it's very difficult to turn a B&B room into a monthly rental without a lot of expense and reconstruction. So that's I don't see a lot of B&Bs. If they were forced out of having a B&B, they would not be turning them into a monthly rental for somebody.
I think we really need to be looking at purpose-built rentals if we're gonna approach the problem with rental housing, because secondary suites in people's homes are, in fact, the least secure form of housing, because you can be evicted for them for a multitude of reasons that you cannot be evicted from a purpose-built rental. There's also rent controls that are applied to those buildings. So, you know, if we look for every crawl space, every basement, every bedroom that we can cram somebody in, we're going to run out of rooms before we fix the problem anyway. The solution is to stop spending time with these regulations and get down to the business of building homes. We can grow our way out of this at the rate that we need to if we focus on that. There's funding coming down the pipe. The island of Cortez uses 100% of their MRDT taxes for affordable housing. We can look at something like that. So extracting those funds from B&Bs, allow them to live and use that money to get shovel-ready projects for purpose-built rentals. BC Builds is throwing millions and millions of dollars at projects. For example, they'll look at any infrastructure building like a community center, a fire hall, a hospital, and they will provide funds to build housing units on top of those. So I just want to be proactive. We don't need to go this route and try and put people in other people's homes, especially in a tourist town. Like, so much of the legislation, and they talked about it at the housing seminar at AVICC last week. Their focus was never on B&Bs. It was on whole house Airbnbs. And I think one of the problems is that we're using a platform called Airbnb, and people have latched onto that. And they admitted at the conference when asked about B&Bs, they were like, oh, well, we didn't really think about those. They're talking about whole vacant homes. So I just want to be careful about vilifying people who are not even on the radar from the province.
Any further discussion? Councillor Anderson?
Well, I would further that. I agree with what Councillor Kennington said, and it's a democracy, so I know that we don't see eye to eye, Councillor Mafti, but I still enjoy the debate, and I think you've got really good points. Yeah, my thoughts are just sort of from the top level. It seems to me like that the reason that the whole country and a lot of the world is feeling this is, well, especially in our country, we had the population grow so quickly. And it was essentially the federal and provincial levels that didn't keep up with housing. There was basically no houses that were really built for almost 20 years. There were no incentives. But the population grew, there was immigration, we just didn't keep in lockstep with the availability of housing for the people that were coming here. And what that ends up happening is the competition for rentals and things like that. And it's interesting because then it's the municipalities who end up having to pick up the pieces in that case, because now we're the ones that are having to house people, and we're having a really hard time with it. And it's funny when we know that the answer is to build more houses, that the affordable housing, just building houses is our way out of this. That's we all know that, but it seems like the knee-jerk reaction is to vilify or go for the low-hanging fruit, which is to vilify STRs and just be like, oh, you've got a place that we could put someone in and you're making nightly rental on that. But realistically, that was the rules that everyone played by, and that's also part of the character of our town. And people don't necessarily want to stay in hotels. Sometimes they want to stay in the community, and they want to be able to live amongst us. And I think that's part of the character of our town. And I think STRs are an important part of who we are.
Anything further, Councillor Hoare?
Well, I'm just turn your mic on, Jen. I was also at that housing seminar at AVICC with Councillor Kennington, and one of the things that someone pointed out, and I'm just gonna say it, although I'm not sure how I feel about it 100%, but the cheapest housing is the housing that's already built. Right? It's already got services, it's already got all those things. So that was something that we were reminded of more than once during that workshop. And I certainly don't want to vilify B&Bs, and I don't want the non-conforming shut down in 2 weeks. I think that's ridiculous. I would like a solution, but I would like us to be looking towards a long-term solution. I would like something that allows them to operate this year, like I really would. I just would also like us to be looking forward past, a year down the road sort of thing. So, which might be zoning changes, which might be spot zoning, but just, yeah.
Just to clarify, when they talked about the cheapest housing is the housing that's already built, they were referring to BC Housing buying existing apartment buildings and repurposing them and fixing them up. They were not referring to people's residences.
That was actually Cortez Island representative who said that, which was actually referring to people's houses and that were short-term rentals.
I still, the reason why that housing is cheap is because somebody's paid for it.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And that's why we've we've gone to the trouble when a developer comes to us, like Lot 16, we've insisted that the apartment building get built first, because that's the type of accommodation that's required right away,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Very much so.
The density keeps it reasonable, affordable.
Yeah, but we have no apartment building at Lot 16. The development that was just finally, that went through at Lot 13, the affordable housing, one of the big fights was dealing with an increased cap of affordability, where all of a sudden affordable housing requires an income of like $120,000 a year or $110,000 a year to qualify. I think the word vilify keeps getting thrown around, and I want to be clear. I want to support people as best I can. I don't think anyone should feel like STRs are the enemy here. But at the end of the day, I mean, you know, we have to be realistic about what our options are. And it's really easy to say, oh, you know, the Fed stopped building houses 50 years ago. This is a federal responsibility. Oh, you know, the province isn't doing enough. This is a provincial responsibility. That's the same thing that they're saying to us, and it's like a hot potato. And at the end of the day, here we are in Ucluelet. We have to make decisions here today for our community. And if we're going to wait around for the province to come and build us housing, or for the federal government to come and build us housing, we're going to be waiting a long time. And what happens in the meantime? You know, we want housing built here. Where are workers going to stay? Who's going to buy that housing? There are so many challenges, and we see them time and time again. It's not like we don't have developers coming here saying we want to build houses, but we all know that the types of houses that developers see a space and a place for here, and they're all completely out of range for most normal working people, certainly for people who live in Ucluelet. And so if we let other people come and tell us what kind of housing we should have here, we're going to end up with lots of really nice fancy mansions, and we're not going to be able to house the people that are struggling, or that have struggled and left. You know, right at the beginning, Mayor McEwen said, well, I think we know how the community feels based on the tremendous feedback, which is awesome. But I think this is how the stakeholders feel. And I understand that's why, you know, 49 people wrote in. But there are a lot more than 49 people in this town. And a lot of them have had to leave because they couldn't find a place to stay. They couldn't find a place to rent, or they couldn't afford it anymore. Everything keeps going up and up. Building costs are going up. Like, I'm not suggesting that the solution to our problems is in how we deal with these non-conforming B&Bs. But I think we need to be realistic that there is no silver bullet solution that's just over the horizon, and we have to make little steps, little changes, and just do the next right thing. And I'm not sure that putting more putting more short-term rentals into our community is going to do anything but exacerbate a lot of the challenges that we're facing, including the people who have short-term rentals. If all 49 of these people were grandfathered in, I really would be. I'd be pleasantly surprised, and I'd congratulate those whose financial troubles would be over, who had no more challenges, as if this was the only problem that we're facing or that we'll be facing in the future.
But I think that's why they need the mortgage helper. They need the B&B as a mortgage helper so they can afford to live here.
Yeah, for sure. But there are lots of people that live here that aren't represented in this group of 49 people. And I think as a council, we have to represent the whole community, not just the 49. And this goes back to the point that your anonymous sage made of balancing the needs of the individual versus the needs of the community. I have a tremendous amount of sympathy for these folks, and that's why I want to do everything we can to make this like the easiest possible transition. But I don't think it's a transition to say, let's accept the status quo, business as usual, and we're like the frog in the pot of water. And then 10 years down the road, we're going to be like, wow, what happened? How come nobody thought about this?
But giving them a year to figure it out, that is not helping.
No.
That's not going to help anybody. That's going to add stress for 365 days for these people.
The housing minister, when asked, what's the solution to the housing crisis, and he simply said, build more houses. We need to get there. We need to focus on that. We need to form those partnerships when we're at these conventions. We need to be out there hustling for people, not asking them to give up what they have. It's our job to get out there and get houses built. So let's get out there and get some houses built.
And And every developer that has come to us in our term, we have insisted that there be a component of affordable and attainable housing in their development. That's a showstopper right there. They can't just build a bunch of single family lots that nobody's going to be able to afford to buy and build on.
With the lots that we have that are proposed in Yuki, like we're talking about doubling the size of the town. If none of those are allowed to do SDRs, we're going to grow our way out of the problem and dilute the situation again without hurting anybody existing. If you know what you're buying into and you're buying into something that doesn't have SDR, then you can never complain about it. But pulling the rug out is not the solution.
So I'm just going to ask who on council would support me in repealing zoning amendment bylaw 1310/2022. Okay, so that's something that we will move forward with. So, Mr. Rotenberg, do we rise and report?
Okay, procedurally. So procedurally, you guys are in the committee of the whole. The committee of the whole has an opportunity now to make a recommendation to council. If the committee adopts a recommendation to council, for example, the recommendation recommended in the report, if the committee then rises and reports, council now considers it. So for the general public, council is sitting in a different seat right now. They're the committee of the whole. If they rise and report, they sit in their regular seat as council and they consider the matter right before them. So they would consider the recommendation that they give themselves. Weird, right?
Yes. And if the recommendation is to repeal that bylaw, the other part of what I wanted to see was a new R1 zone formed, 2.0, whatever we want to call it, to restrict nightly rentals. Is that something that would be combined, or would that be a separate motion?
Through the
Gray?
mayor, I think separate motions would be helpful, and maybe a little discussion. First of all, I don't think it's as simple as repealing that bylaw that made amendments, because there were a few amendments in there. It really is directing us to bring forward an amendment to take out those pieces, and I think we understand the intent, but it's not simply a motion of repealing a bylaw which has been adopted. So really we have to move forward with the zoning bylaw and change it essentially. So in terms of what kind of motion we're looking for, I think we understand the intent and we can sort of help with the wording of that. The other piece, if the intent is to make further amendments or to create an R1 zone, essentially, that we have some housing zones, some single family residential zones that don't have bed and breakfast as a secondary use. The lot 16 single family lots, that was part of the discussion, is there going to be short-term rentals in this new neighborhood, and it was the direction of the council was no, so that doesn't, so we could certainly do that.
I think they allowed 6 over there.
The 6 are, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
R1, the ones that were on Marine Drive, they were
Yeah.
larger lots, and they but the other 40, I guess, roughly, were essentially small residential lots. So it would be either owners or long-term tenants who would be living in that neighborhood. A question that maybe is worth a bit of community discussion is a little clarity on where the intent of applying that, essentially, if the intent is, do we want to remove that accessory short-term accommodation from essentially unbuilt single-family areas? And for example, what comes to mind is we have a subdivision that's underway for 33 lots. The current zoning down at the end of Marine Drive would allow them to all have bed and breakfast uses within them. Is the intent to amend that, which we need to amend anyways, now, or is it only with future rezoning applications?
Future rezoning applications is what my intent would be. Okay, so the motion would be to have staff come back to council with an amendment to
Forgive me for interrupting. It's committee. The intent to remove that entry through the front door traditional B&B, that group of regulations?
it's everything that's highlighted here, that bylaw 1310 installed into that. Just remove all that. Personally, I would remove number 4 as well, the fact that they can't have a kitchenette, but for now, I guess we'll just leave it to put it back exactly the way it was before September of 2022. So is that a clear enough motion?
I think so.
Okay, can I have a seconder? Any further discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? That carries. And then the second motion would be to have staff come back with a new R1 zoning, or a new zoning that would restrict nightly rentals in residential areas
For future
for future builds.
subdivision. For future subdivision, or
For future subdivision, yes. Do I have a seconder?
I'll second that.
Councillor Hoare, any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed. That carries. Do you have everything you need, Mr. Craig?
There was
Mike?
also a recommended motion on the matter of a few business licenses which are going to be in trouble on May 1st.
Yeah, the recommendation referred to the non-conforming. I was about to bring that up.
Was that option 5?
No, it's at the bottom of the committee of the whole report. I can read it for you if you like.
Yeah, I don't think I have that.
It's on page 26 of the agenda, I think.
Is that not, if we make those amendments, the essential repeal, then isn't that somewhat of a moot point? Because
Bringing back a draft of some zoning amendment bylaws and getting them adopted by May 1st.
It's too tight a
We need a
timeline.
motion to renew some business licenses.
so we renew the business licenses, and in the meantime, we
Work on the
On the other stuff.
the bylaws.
right.
Okay, so I do see that. So I'll move that the Committee of the Whole recommend Council direct staff to renew those existing bed and breakfast business licenses that are legally non-conforming to Section 404 of the zoning bylaw as of April 30th, 2024 for a period of 1 year, notwithstanding Section 2(2) of Ucluelet Business Regulation and Licensing Bylaw number 922, 2003.
I'll second that.
Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed. That carries. And I will move that the Committee of the Whole rise and report.
I'll second.
All in favor? None opposed. None opposed. That carries. Okay.
So now you're back in your shoes as council. You have 3 motions that you've adopted as a committee of the whole. You're making recommendations to yourself, and now you've got to consider whether council agrees with yourself. Okay?
I love
So,
hats.
basically, we have those 3 motions. I'll have the mayor repeat the motions. You should you'll have a mover and a seconder for each of them. Probably best for you to do them separately. And rather than the committee of the whole recommended, it'll be council directs staff to, I believe, in all 3 circumstances. And then you can ditch the rise and report because you've risen and reported, and now you're sitting in your current shoes as council. The idea here is that the committee, so this is odd, right? The committee sits in an advisory capacity, right? Just like any committee. So that's why they're advising or recommending themselves to do something. And now they're sitting back as council, and you've got to make a resolution to direct your staff to do what you want to do, because the committee itself doesn't have that authority.
Okay. So I'll start with the one that's written in front of me. Since the Committee of the Whole decided to rise and report, Council will now consider the Committee's recommendation to renew existing bed and breakfast business licenses that are legally non-conforming to Section 404 of the zoning bylaw as of April 30th, 2024.
I'll second.
Councillor
There's
Anderson.
more to that.
That's not a motion. Now make a motion. I move that.
I move that
Council direct staff.
council direct staff to renew existing bed and breakfast business licenses that are legally non-conforming to Section 404 of the zoning bylaw as of April 30th, 2024. Now you can second
No, I
it.
second that.
Okay, the staff recommendation was for 1 year, for a period of 1 year, notwithstanding section 2 sub 2 of the Euclid Business Regulation and Licensing Bylaw, because that was initially the resolution that you guys recommended yourself. So we'll just need the full resolution there.
Oh,
Make sure
okay.
we're still on board.
I move that council direct staff to renew those existing bed and breakfast business licenses that are legally non-conforming to Section 404 of the zoning bylaw as of April 30th, 2024, for a period of 1 year, notwithstanding Section 2(2) of Euclid Business Regulation and Licensing Bylaw number 922/2003.
I'll second that.
Councillor Hoare seconds. Any further discussion? All in favour? None opposed? That carries. And I didn't write the other two down, but
If you'd like, I can try to pop them up and maybe
Okay.
get them up on the screen, and we can make sure it's exactly what you want.
okay.
Thank you for bearing with me here. I think this resolution captures council's intention. I can change it, obviously, however council would like.
That looks about right. Would someone like to make that motion? Okay, Councillor Anderson.
I would move that council direct staff to present zoning amendment bylaws intended to, number one, remove amendments to the zoning bylaw established by zoning amendment bylaw 1310, and number two, create a version of the R1 zone with no accessory B&B use to apply to future development.
Do I have a seconder?
Shouldn't these be separate?
They're supposed to be separate, are they not?
You're fine to do them together because you're not giving readings of a bylaw at this point. And you're fine to do them together because you're providing direction to staff, and that direction, I think, is pretty clear.
Okay, seconder?
Second.
Councillor Kennington. Okay, any further discussion? All in favor? Any opposed? That carries. All right. Nobody has to stay for the rest of the meeting if you don't want to. Okay, there are, are there any notices of motion? Seeing none, there are 3 correspondence items. The first one is 9.1, seaplane use in the harbour. Just looking to staff, do we know where we're at with Harbour Air at the moment? Mr. Lawrence?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. At this point in time, Harbour Air has applied for a business license. The aerodrome permits them to land in the community. So right now we're looking at a business license for them, as well as a use agreement for the wharf. Apparently they decided to jump the gun a little bit and land on the weekend with 20 minutes notice. So we're having discussions with Harbour Air, but at this point in time there's a lease agreement for use of Whiskey Dock, a portion of Whiskey Dock, as well as the business license that they're after.
So when they get the business license, they will give us a schedule of their flights, I assume.
They won't need to provide that. They will have it up on their website, and their schedule will change as per their business plan.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Can I just speak to the item that was submitted?
Sure.
I echo a lot of the concerns in here. Obviously, it's beyond our control, and the horse has already left the barn. But I think that this is going to have a significant impact on the inlet as we know it. And it was really heartwarming to see how excited people get when herring spawn in the inlet, when whales come up the inlet. And as someone who's done a lot of work in the Tofino Inlet and in the Ucluelet Inlet as well, there's obviously a considerable significant impact that the level of floatplane service that Harbour Air has proposed is going to have on the harbour. I think it's going to affect tour operators. I think it's going to affect a lot of people in unanticipated ways. It's also not at all clear to me that this is really going to benefit locals. I can see people maybe taking a flight a year, in which case it's easy enough to drive to Tofino or elsewhere. This seems to be basically a cash grab for Harbour Air that can just plug a stop into an existing route, and the impacts are going to be felt by the people who live here. And it's unfortunate that we don't have more of a say in it, but at least I can go on the record and say that I certainly agree with the concerns raised in the letter. And yeah, it's sad to see it move forward. I have one fan here today.
We're all fans, Mark.
Okay, the second item, 9.2, is a funding request from the Chamber of Commerce. Shall I read out this background information, Mr. Rotenberg?
No, it's totally up to you. I just wanted you to have that information if you need it.
I'll read some of it. The Chamber of Commerce presented to Council on September 26th of last year. At that time, they were participating in a regional initiative called the Alberni-Clayoquot Regional Economic Resiliency Initiative, which was developing a report to understand the economic impact of the highway closure and its ongoing impacts on businesses and communities. The report was intended to be a starting point for the Chamber's next project called the 2024 Ucluelet Economic Readiness Strategy, Recovery and Resilience Model for Rural and Remote Communities. There's no acronym for that, eh? The 2024 project is intended to establish local community-based response mechanisms and mitigation strategies to overcome economic challenges caused by natural disasters. The Chamber requested a letter of support for the REDIP grant to fund this project, $35,000 to offset the cost of hiring a third-party professional to kickstart the 2024 project, and a renewed partnership with the district. The Chamber was just notified that they did not receive the REDIP grant, but they believe they can complete a scaled-back version of the project nonetheless. They are therefore requesting the funding. These funds have already been allocated to the Chamber in the draft budget we considered earlier this evening. So I pulled the report, Josh, that you gave me September 15th when you were giving us the background and the activities. Perhaps would it be possible to get a revised version of that now that you're not, you weren't successful with the grant, with possibly a budget kind of attached to it? That would be really helpful to for us to make it clear in our minds where the money is going to. Thank you. That would be great. Did you want to speak to it in any way, shape, or form?
Thank you for considering this request. As you know, the Ucluelet Chamber of Commerce has been stepping up their role of economic development and developed and put together the Economic Development Committee. That we have a lot of plans that we're going to be working forward with that, and we'd be interested in doing this work in a more official capacity, along with the assistance of our Economic Development Committee, and of course myself. So economic development is common for a Chamber of Commerce to administer, particularly in smaller communities that don't have a dedicated economic development department within the municipality. But these efforts are always meant to be compensated for and to be supported financially and through strong partnership and collaboration. Thus, as the Chamber continues to step up its economic development efforts, we're hoping to solidify this support for both fuel efforts and to help the Chamber's sustainability. Part of our work will be to continue to source out and apply for grants. So just because we didn't get this one, it's not going to be stopping our efforts by any means. And the Economic Development Committee on its own will be trying to source out grants to be able to fuel the many different projects that we'll be working towards as we go on. So we still plan on running this important program, but in a different capacity, and I will outline that to the council. I'll send in information in regards to that, and Sorry, some of this has already been brought up by yourself, so I'm skipping over a couple things that I had in my notes. Yeah, I guess that's pretty much it. Yeah, we would be just doing a scaled down version of the project and doing a little bit more of the legwork ourselves rather than outsourcing that. But one of the biggest things is still trying to get the right kind of consultant to be able to make sure that we're going in the right direction and everything from the start. And that's kind of an important factor of that. So, but we don't necessarily need to hire a staff member because that would be a lot part of it. It would be going. The rest of the money would have been going towards.
Right, so it'd be a part-time consultant then?
Yeah, mostly at the front end to be able to help put the data framework together and know what kind of analytics we're going to be looking at to try to help the community as best we can. So.
Great. Okay, thank you for the clarification.
Yeah,
That's
thank you.
Great. There are 4 information items. We've got the small-scale multi-unit housing legislation, the RTOERO Future of Aging Summit. I think this was on a previous agenda, and nobody could make this one, I think. Yeah, but there is a virtual component of it, yeah. But I think nobody was free from what I recall. It's May 15th to 17th.
I might take a stab at this.
Okay, it would be in your ballpark for sure.
Yeah.
Anyone else interested in attending virtually?
Interested but can't.
I think I'm on vacation that.
Oh, okay. All right, then I would move that Councillor Anderson be authorized to electronically attend and represent the district at the RTOERO Future of Aging Summit, and that Council direct staff to make appropriate arrangements. If I can have a seconder.
I'll second it.
Any further discussion? All in favor? None opposed? That carries. 10.3, the support for the resolution. That's from Mayor Sue McCortoff. She's the only other female mayor of all the 14 resort municipalities. It's just her and I. And it's support for a resolution for the SILGA convention, which is kind of their version of the LGLA that we just attended.
AVICC.
Or AVICC, sorry, AVICC.
Actually interesting that resolution kind of resonated following the presentation at AVICC that Tracy Lawrenson gave on respect.
Yes, we're quite fortunate that we, as far as I know, we don't face a lot of this from our constituents, but there are municipalities where the mayor and council are increasing levels of personal and defamatory attacks. So that's
Generally, I'm the only one throwing tomatoes. Nobody throws them at me.
that's right.
The best defense is a good offense, right?
I've got a good right arm.
Okay, so mayor's announcements and council committee reports. Councillor Anderson.
All right, I'll try and go quick here. So obviously I was at the AVICC and just we were just talking about the seniors. There was a resolution on the floor for addressing the needs of rural seniors in BC. And yeah, after going to Isabel's talk, Isabel McKenzie, the seniors advocate for BC, I was like, I was actually pretty taken by that. And I thought it was pretty interesting how there's sort of a discrepancy between how much funding goes towards seniors in larger cities versus rural areas. And I thought that was I think it's just there's a possibility that we can make a difference. So the resolution that was at AVICC was essentially to start a ministry for seniors living in rural environments and living in their homes longer. So there's a few things that came up today. So switching gears from AVICC to I went to the Island Health meeting this morning in Tofino. One of the hot topics there was the new hospital, and everyone had a chance to speak. Dan was there, the Island Health president, CEO, a handful of others. Marcy DeWitt was there. Sort of everyone in the health and wellness game was there, and it was great. Some of the big questions that were coming up that people wanted to. The questions that came up on the board were, what unique challenges exist for people in these communities and what do we need to pay attention to? So these are the questions for Island Health. What community-based services are needed to help people out of hospital or needed to keep people out of the hospital in the future? And what can we work on together now to ensure the needs of the people on the West Coast are being met? So the great part is I was at a table. Tom Stewart was at our table, counselor from Tofino, and a member of Island Health as well. And we were able to talk about our medical center going in here. So I think I sort of unceremoniously switched everything to about us, about Ucluelet.
Excellent.
And I was able to meet with the guy that's in charge of Max that will actually be assigning what the offices are going to look like and what the actual building is going to look like in terms of
Max Jajak.
Yes. And he was great, and he wants to interface with that. So we'll be able to know exactly what we're getting, and without saying too much about it, because this is early stage, we all agreed that no matter how many hospitals or medical centers you bring, we have to find a place to put the people that work there. So housing, once again, came up, and but the silver lining, and it's too early to say anything about it, but BC Housing has partnered with Island Health, and they definitely have a fund, and so whether that means chipping in on a development or something that's coming down the pipe, to be able to put like a long-term lease on something, they're willing to do something like that, which is super exciting. And so I think we're just trying to push them as hard as we can to get as many things in that medical center as possible to keep people from having to travel distances for things that they may not have to do. I'm talking like dialysis and things like that. So I guess we'll just kind of keep that updated as it goes, and Max is more than happy to interface. So that was a really good thing to go to. That's it for me.
Thank you for attending that for me. I really appreciated that.
Pleasure.
Councillor Hoare.
Yeah, it sounds like we sent you to the right meeting, just saying. All right, I will start way back, feels like forever ago. April 3rd, I was at the Wild Pacific Trail Society meeting, and there was a report on Whalefest, and there were huge numbers of interactions, lots of tourists really excited about what's going on at the lighthouse with the Lightkeeper's house, looking forward to having somewhere that is inside and dry, because it was raining, where they could watch the waves and potentially learn things, and just a lot of excitement there. What was also interesting is that Rachel noticed there were already parking concerns at the Coast Guard station as well as in the whale lot. Both were full. Both sides of Coast Guard Road were lined with vehicles on the sunnier days, don't get me wrong. So just gonna drop that thought out there. And the other exciting thing for the Trail Society is they have now got their summer student has agreed, the one they'll have working with Josh. So they are kind of, I want to say, fully-ish staffed going into the summer. So look for lots of programs starting June. And then I was attending AVICC, and that housing workshop that Councillor Kennington and I attended was really, really interesting. Lots of people presenting from different segments, the BC Builds and the provincial government. This fellow representative from Cortez, who's really involved with the housing society there. And some builders and developers. There was a very diverse group of presentations. And I just think it's interesting because housing is all the things. The mayor of Courtenay said that one of the things that every issue when it comes up, whether it's opioid addictions, whether it's health issues, whether it's seniors issues, every time it comes back to housing. It is like the underlining problem for a lot of things. So, and then there was a lot of, there was a nice presentation on something called the Village that's down in Courtenay, which is a wraparound model of support, housing the hardest to house. And it was just, very interesting. There was also some good stuff on inclusive governance and reconciliation. I always love to quote John Jack when I get the opportunity. And he said that in the spirit of Ishsawak, which I probably just butchered my pronunciation, the notion that everything is one in the Nuu-chah-nulth peoples, remember that everything is interconnected. And then he pointed out, he's like, you're not stuck in traffic, you are the traffic. And so, it's not a problem with the board, you are the board. It's not it's just remember that it's everybody and everything, not just me, it's us. And his other takeaway was like to make a commitment to do better over time. It might not be perfect today, might not be perfect tomorrow, but work your way towards it over time. What else? There was a really interesting ocean symposium that we were all at. I was quite fascinated, and I want to go play around on the Pacific Salmon Foundation's site. They've got some really amazing mapping programs, and you can access information on things that are affecting like fish habitats or might affect the spawning outcome of various fishes, salmon or anything else. So in all my spare time, I'm going to go take a look at that. Switching hats. I will point out that we have dinner theater coming up May 3rd and 4th. If you haven't got your ticket yet, you better get on it. Limited number of tickets available. $80 will get you a 3-course meal and possibly a laugh or 6. Please don't bring tomatoes to throw at me. I do promise to be up on stage. Speaking of tomatoes, switching hats again. In case you guys haven't found out about it or seen the little clip on the co-op's Instagram, we're doing something called Frugal Finds. Now, for a long time, I've been culling in the produce department things that are ugly, things that people won't buy if it's not the perfect potato or it's not, the apple with the pumpkins the side. And those things go to the food bank, but the food bank only picks up 2 days a week. Well, there's 7 days in a week. So there's a whole lot of other days where we collect things that are imperfect. And while nothing has gone to the landfill, it all has gone to people's animals and chickens and pigs and whoever else is picking up for me this week. We're now taking the stuff that would be the things that would go to the food bank, and packing them into like bags. So I usually have an idea in my head when I pack a bag. So it might be what I think of as a soup bag, might be a salsa bag if I have a whole lot of tomatoes and a not great jalapeno that you need to chop the end off. And so they're $3 to $5. There's applesauce bags, just take a boo. There's a little basket in the edge of the produce department, and there are things. That being said, the food bank is still getting support from us. They still get lots of stuff because I can't put things that need to be refrigerated or stay wet or any of those things. So food bank's still getting lots. But we want to help people because, believe me, every time I look at my invoices, I know how those prices are changing, especially on produce. It's a very volatile commodity. So keep your eyes open or ask me about it anytime. Just don't throw the tomatoes at me, please. That's all I got.
That's great. John Jack had another really good quote. I thought for sure that you would have used this one when talking about reconciliation, that we need to learn to free paint, not paint within the lines.
How many times can you quote John in a meeting, right?
All the time,
We
yeah.
we should send him the link to the meeting.
Yes, go ahead, Councillor Anderson.
Well, I just wanted to add one more thing that at the Island Health event this morning, the breakfast, it was Josh was there, and Josh actually spoke at it, and I just wanted to make mention because he's out there pounding the pavement for Ucluelet, and I don't know, it was pretty good to see you were working it there. That was awesome. So thank you for that.
Was that at the Tin Whiz?
Yep.
The food was good?
Was it healthy?
It was Ian Riddick actually.
Nice.
Again, yeah, he did the last one as well, and yeah, I felt spoiled. I was like, wow, this is deluxe, but yeah, it was really good.
Just
Nice.
rub it in.
What's that?
Rub it in.
Right? I can't remember if I said it, but Hartwood is doing the food for dinner theater.
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome.
Great. Okay, Councillor Kennington.
Well, I was there just like everybody else at AVICC, and the one big thing that I was excited about was the housing, although I did think it was going to be more of the same that we've seen. It turned out to be entirely not that. It was actually probably the most informative of the housing forums that we've been to. So some of the things that came out of there's always a lot of talk about how are these considered affordable rents, and they explained how that works. When they do an 80% market, 20% affordable apartment building, they become affordable over time because they're rent controlled. So while they start off a little bit more expensive because they have to pencil out, they become affordable over time. The other thing that was mentioned was and I mentioned it previously, was that they will fund living units above our district infrastructure, so community centers, fire halls, hospitals, anything like that. Like if we have any projects, we should approach them and see what we can do to add housing to those, if for nothing else than to staff those facilities. They also mentioned a housing development opportunity page, which if you have pre-zoned land, you can basically go there and ask for help, and they will connect you with builders, operators. Basically, it's like an online partnership seeker. So swipe left or right or whatever it is. And I wanted to mention that I was incorrect in clarifying Jen's point about the cheapest housing. That was my bad. That was something that I had heard previously. So perhaps he was picking up on that and using that, but that was in reference to something else. So I wanted to just correct myself on that. We know about that. And then the Cortez Island thing I wanted to mention again, they're using 100% of their MRDT from Airbnbs to fund affordable housing. So they said it doesn't amount to a whole lot, but what they're doing with it is feasibility studies and whatnot, and sort of getting shovel-ready projects going using that MRDT. I don't know if there's a way that we can assign a certain kind of tax that we're collecting from a certain kind of unit and dedicate it that way so that it's a win-win situation. They seem to think it was as well. The builders were pretty what you would expect from builders. They say they're blacklisting municipalities that are throwing up too many roadblocks, and that's causing problems for those municipalities getting housing done. And they build this risk versus reward into their pro forma, so that when they're approaching a municipality with a project, they're actually padding them out when they're going to municipalities that have too many restrictions, or they're too difficult to work with, and in turn that increases the cost to build and the cost to then buy and rent. So stuff that you would expect them to say. And then the other thing, did you want to add something to what I would?
I was just, I can't remember, and you might, the fellow from Cortez, they're the first ones to be able to use
That's right.
MRDT for
Yeah.
that,
Yeah.
for that purpose.
So
which I
that's a
thought
big
was
deal.
interesting.
But
Yeah.
the fact that they were able to do it means it is possible. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that's good or bad for us, but let's just throw it out there and see what happens. The other presentation that I found really interesting, and it struck home, was the presentation on boundaries and what we face as councillors and mayor, and the threats that we receive, and the bullying, and how challenging this job can be. And I want people to know that yes, we do have boundaries, and we do not have to answer the phone if we don't want to, but we usually do. And it was quite timely because she was talking about how people will call you on a Sunday, and literally my phone rang for a constituent. So it was like, and I didn't answer it because
You have
I
boundaries.
was in a workshop. I have boundaries, but then I ran out and called them back.
At least you get your name in the paper.
Yes, I do. Well, so do you.
I think they spelled it wrong.
They did. I think they called you
Shane Anderson.
Ian Anderson
Yeah.
or something. Yeah, they got you
Oh
wrong.
my god, that's a terrifying thought.
Yeah.
Melding the two together.
Super counts.
And I think that's pretty much all. It was a great conference. I was glad to see the last time we were there, I made a suggestion that please no more cookies. We could use some healthy snacks, and this time there were bananas and oranges and apples, and I was quite happy to see that. It's totally irrelevant, but I was
Yeah.
happy anyway.
That's good. We like it when you're happy.
You wouldn't like me when I'm angry.
Okay, so we're off to Councillor Mafty.
Well, everyone already covered all the items I was going to mention. AVICC was great. I thought there was a lot of interesting information. The one thing that I would add to what's already been brought up at the Oceans, there was a presentation from these two gentlemen. I had their cards, and along with the pen, the cards and a bunch of other stuff, including receipts, all slid out of my book. So I don't have their names, although if I find the cards in the parking lot, I'll remind you. They were the two guys. One of them was from the Prawn Fishing Association. The other one was from the Geoduck Harvesting Association. They are in a really interesting position. They have a huge overseas market for their product, but relatively low recognition. Ucluelet, there's prawn fishing in Barkley Sound, although not any currently active prawn boats that I'm aware of, but we have quite a few geoduck boats. They have indicated that they're really looking to explore opportunities to increase awareness of their product. And what attracted me to that notion was the fact that those are two of the most well-managed, sustainable, low-impact fisheries that we have. And so, obviously fishing is a big part of the history here in Ucluelet, and it would be really nice in the current day to focus on some really sort of feel-good fisheries that are lucrative and productive and sustainable as well. And so I encourage them to reach out to us if they had any ideas. I know that they've done like prawn festivals in a couple communities, and anyway, that's something that maybe it'll hit your desk before it hits mine. But they were certainly two really interesting guys who were hilariously out of their depth, because they were both like, we're scientists, man, like we don't know what we're doing, but they were really clever. And it would be really interesting. And I feel like, what struck me then was like, most people don't even know what a geoduck is, and there's millions of dollars of it, coming out of Barkley Sound across our docks and off to Japan and Asia and Asian markets. I think Korea and China are the two big ones, but Japan as well. And yeah, it would be nice to raise awareness of that. It's something to feel good about that happens locally. So love the frugal finds. I think that's a great addition. That's it for me. Oh, coming up, Shorebird Festival, Raincoast Education Society Shorebird Festival. It's week long. There'll be a Shorebird soiree at Hotel Zed on the 28th, not to be missed. Silent auction, food. We'll have oysters. We'll have it all. There'll be drop-in birding all week, and then there's a bird course the following weekend. I think this is the 28th annual Tofino Shorebird Festival, but it's Tofino in name only. We love Ucluelet people to come and participate as well, so looking forward to that one.
I don't think your mic's on.
Oh, well, you can all hit. Okay, well. Oh, that's all right.
Okay, let's start from the top.
No. We'll be there.
Okay, for me, March 27th, I attended an ACRD meeting where they adopted their 5-year financial plan, and it's, I think it's actually part of our package. Yeah. And, their 2024 budget is approximately $29.5 million. Be nice to have that kind of budget. And then that evening, Mr. Lawrence and I went to dinner at Blackrock with the Minister of Tourism, Lana Popham, and our MLA, Josie Osborne. So, and a little team of Minister Popham's associates. April 4th, another ACRD meeting. It was an ACRD-led workshop on inclusive regional governance. And I actually brought 2 of extra orientation guides if anybody wants one. It was based on the fact that right now regional districts do not allow non-treaty nations at the board table. And so the ACRD has been working on trying to figure out how to change that, because right now there's, I think there's 4 treaty nations at the board table, but there's several more treaty nations that aren't at the board table. So that workshop was all about that. Unfortunately, it was at Tyastanis, but it got canceled before it even started because of the passing of hereditary chief in the Hupachaseth Nation. And their tradition is when a hereditary chief passes that everybody just goes home. So April 9th, I attended the West Coast Transit launch and ribbon cutting at the Pacific Rim Visitor Center, which was pretty exciting. We finally have a bus service on the West Coast, and a lunch was provided after that. And April 10th, I went to the Barclay Community Forest meeting, and they still would like to give us a tour, Mayor and Council, of the community forest. So I'll be reaching out to all of you to see what your schedules are like in the coming months. And then an ACRD meeting on April 10th that afternoon, and the most exciting part in that package was a letter from BC Transit. And they have completed their 2024-2025 budget and service plan, and the West Coast is included in that. So they have budgeted for 7,500 annual service hours and 6 expansion buses. So they will be working with the ACRD to tag on to the BC or the West Coast Transit service that we just started April 2nd. But hopefully this will mean more evening buses, because the West Coast Transit kind of ends at 6 o'clock. I think it's meant more for people that need to get between the communities for work. So hopefully BC Transit will augment that with some evening buses. So that was pretty exciting to see that. And then that evening, it was a busy day, at Tourism Ucluelet AGM at Blackrock. There's 3 new board members. Someone named Kareem from the Canadian Princess, Monica Scott from Mint Cleaning, and Josh Brown from Blackrock. So those are the 3 new directors or board members. Stepping down is Adele Larkin from Blackrock, Kevin Bradshaw from Hello Nature, and Laura Griffiths-Cochran from the Aquarium. And then, of course, April 12th to the 14th was the AVICC conference in Victoria. We started out, 3 of us had a Friday morning meeting with Island Health, along with the District of Tofino and the ACRD. It was a joint meeting, and so that was nice to be in a room with them and be able to talk one-on-one with them. It was really helpful. The trade show was great. I went to the Rogers booth, asking what's happening with our internet service along Highway 4, and so I've got the person's name that will come and give us an update. It sounds like they have it in the budget, but the challenge is finding perfect locations for the poles, for the transmitters, the relay stations. The topography, of course, on Highway 4 is pretty challenging, and so they're working with BC Hydro to try and locate the best position for the poles. So what he told me was within 2 years it will definitely be up and running along Highway 4. And networking was great at the conference. Oh, tomorrow is the seniors lunch here at the UCC in the main hall, starting at 11:30. And I was looking through my notes, and tomorrow is the 14th anniversary of this community center. So happy anniversary, UCC. And that's it for me. Any questions for me?
It's not a question. It's more of a comment, and mainly because you were talking about the inclusive governance, and I'm flipping through the pages, and somebody commented at the meeting, it might have been John, at the AVICC meetings, that the Dididat lost their last native speaker of their language.
That's right. That was at the conference. He's mentioned that.
And I just wanted, that makes me so sad. I'm glad that people are learning, but if you're not raised in the language, it's very hard to learn. So that was just a little sad note.
Yeah. Okay, this is an opportunity for the public to ask questions about matters within council's jurisdiction. Representations about matters that have been the subject of a public hearing are not permitted at this time. Are there any questions from the audience? Miss Gray, would you like to step up to the microphone, please?
Judy Gray, 2349 Tofino Ucluelet Highway.
Is your microphone on? Doesn't sound like it.
So Judy Gray, 2349 Tofino Ucluelet Highway, still own 2 properties in town.
I don't think it's on either.
Is it on now?
There it is. Yeah, we
Thank
got
you.
it.
Okay. Anyway, a few comments as well as questions. During the information about the decision to change the B&B zoning back in 2021, I believe that was, the COVID house prices, COVID had increased house prices substantially across the country, everywhere, between 2020 and 2022. So the sharp spike in house prices during that time, I would say, was more in line with the rest of the country, not to do with B&Bs with private entrances. The influx of people into the community, we had the Squamish invasion, as we called it. Many people cashing out of larger communities and coming here as a lifestyle choice, needing to supplement their income in order to do so, which is why we have so many people that have moved here full-time with the full-time residency requirement, also allowing them to supplement their income so they can afford to live here. You saw that today with many people. The incoming of fiber optics helped to stimulate that move for many, many people, and continues to do so. Many have come here for lifestyle choice, and having 1 to 3 rental units has been very helpful. The 60s style bed and breakfast, nobody wants to walk through your main home. Nobody wants to eat your food. Nobody wants to mingle with your children and your dog. And nobody wants you to mingle with your children and their dog. So that, I fought hard against that when it was approved. And allowing some homes to have private entrances to their B&Bs, and that not having to go through the main home creates a have and have not situation for people in the same neighborhood, which is very difficult, as it was brought out tonight. Allowing, or in the OCP covering the Weyerhaeuser lands, back in 2006, I believe it was recommended in that OCP that we create some neighborhoods that allow B&Bs or STRs and some that don't, so that people have the choice whether they want to be in that type of neighborhood or they don't. So I think that was an excellent section of that OCP. I'm not sure that came out in the Master Development Agreement on the Weyerhaeuser lands, but it was intended to be that way. If we don't allow a substantial or portion or a third or whatever the number is of nightly rentals within homes, we will not have enough night beds for tourists to stay in, and that will cost us jobs. We have to have places for the tourists to stay, in order to have the jobs, because there's no logging here anymore. We are still huge offloader of fish, but that fish hits the truck and it leaves town. It's no longer being processed, or very little of it's being processed in the community compared to what it used to be. We had three fish plants. Now we have one that sort of kind of works sometimes. And we have to remember that the majority of our income and our jobs is coming from tourism, and that needs a place for those people to sleep. With respect to lot 16 over here, construction costs are out of control. We want to build houses. We need more houses. So that's our way out of this housing crisis, is allowing more construction of homes with or without secondary suites for full-time residential. That's not going to happen on this lot. We're not going to see that apartment building if these folks can't raise some funds to build it. And I really would beg council to reconsider their application. Maybe increase the amount of money that they would have to pay you if they didn't build it out in 5 years. But it's not going to happen if they don't have the funds to do it. And they're not going to get the funds to do it if they can't sell some lots. It really needs to happen that way. I'm going to throw a winger out here. Now that I'm living out of town, every day I drive past the Raven Motel property and the hole next door. Terrible location for that project. But anyway, the Raven Motel property has 4 extremely large ancient cedar trees on it that are absolutely stunningly beautiful. The buildings on that property, most of them have code compliance issues and safety issues. Wouldn't it be cool to have that piece of property as park with the combination of affordable housing? I just say that as something that's been running through my brain, and it's doable. I don't know how, but I'd like to try and figure it out. And I think that it's something that could happen that would be really good for town and for saving those darn trees. A comment, that we have a wait list for First Light. We have some rental units there that we've been trying to sell to, I've sort of lightly been trying to sell to some of the employers in town for staff housing. They can't afford to put the staff in there under the restrictions for the income. It's going to be really hard to put people in there. Single moms and dads, for sure, they'll be able to go in there, but I don't know who else will be able to. And then on Bill 44, up to 4 residences in a single-family home. I know that Weyerhaeuser's looking at, it's in their plan to upgrade the services for the larger lots to allow a homeowner to have 4 residential units in a single-family dwelling. I know that infrastructure is going to be the main issue there, but it's also that this legislation says that the minimum population for that is 5,000. We don't fit that bill. So how can council work it that we can have 4 units in a single-family home, that we can take advantage of that legislation and allow that to happen? There's all kinds of things out there right now with all these 3 bills going through. It's crazy. I've been working, having discussions with a company called West Plan Consulting. Tanisha and Mark are the planners that own that company, and they're working with UBCM and VIU, and they have a list of municipalities that have partnered with them. Tofino happens to be one of them. They're going to work directly with Qualicum right away to implement the changes. They're trying to create consistencies across the province with the direction of the province of British Columbia, trying to create consistencies in planning and approval processes to streamline things and make things work faster, and so that we can get things moving quicker. And it was unfortunate I didn't see Ucluelet's name on that list. There's a big long list, and I've provided it to a couple of you. So anyway, that's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Judy. Does anyone else in the audience wish to speak? Okay.
Good evening. My name is Marcel Midlane. I live here over on St. Jacques Boulevard. I just wanted to say thank you for your consideration tonight about the legal non-conforming suites. I fall into that category as well as my wife. We did write a letter to Mayor and Council. I appreciate the support for our suites as well as the opposition, and I understand completely why the two opposing councillors have taken that stance for the time being, and is to seek out longer solutions and give the community time for input in that regard. I'm wondering, and it's only because I don't know, has anybody in Ucluelet or in the planning department ever considered like laneway housing for properties in this community to build basically to build rentals for long-term rentals for people?
There is the provision for ADUs, accessory dwelling units, that can be on a person's property. Is that maybe what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think so. Lots of other communities, I think Parksville has adopted it, and a whole bunch of Vancouver and larger centers. But I've never really followed along or paid attention to it, but that may be something to consider promoting on some people's properties if we want to have more rentals, to allow the zoning for that.
Yeah, we did allow, that was part of that bylaw 1310 in September of 2022. I could never figure out why it was part of the same bylaw. I kind of thought it should be its own bylaw, but there you go. And Councillor Kennington, you probably have some contacts that have started building?
Yeah, actually, I designed one for a friend up on Marine Drive, and it's complete now, and it's a 2-bedroom, and the long-term tenant, I think, is moving in within a week or two. So it is, and then there was the, oh my gosh, I don't know why it's escaping me, across from the post office, Mills. They're doing something above their garage. So even in cases where it doesn't quite fit, council's been sort of giving variances and whatnot to promote that. And there's also a program, an assistance program coming out from the provincial government for secondary suites and ADUs. So I think it's low interest financing for, it's a ridiculous amount of time, but they are providing some amount of financing. So those wheels are in motion.
Awesome.
Yeah.
That's good. No, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. No, thanks very much, and thanks for listening to all of us, and that most people vacated, but I haven't sat in one of these in a long time, so I was staying till the end. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for coming. Anyone else in the audience wish to speak? Are there any questions by Zoom, Mr. Rotenberg?
Please click the raise your hand icon if you have a question for council, or *9 if you're attending by phone. No hands are raised at this time.
And have we received any questions via email to communityinput@ucluelet.ca?
We have not received questions, but we did receive 3 additional correspondence items related to item 7.1. So that was the Committee of the Whole report that you guys just dealt with. Our cutoff for late items is 2 hours before the council meeting. because we have to publish a late agenda at one point or another, so they were not included in that agenda. If you'd like, I can distribute copies of those letters to all of you now.
You could just forward by email. That would be great. Sure.
Of course.
All right. There's no need to go into a closed session today. So may I have a motion to adjourn the April 16th, 2024 regular council meeting at 6:19?
So moved.
Councillor Hoare,
Second.
Councillor Mafty seconds. All in favor? None opposed. That carries.
Thank you, Marilyn.
You bet. You didn't steal my pen.